بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. نشكر أولا سعادة الدكتور عبد العزيز بن عبد الرحمن المسلم رئيس معهد الشارقة للتراث، ونشكر لكم هذا الحضور في هذا العام. الفكرة الرئيسة لهذه الأيام وضعنا لها عنوانا أسميناه دلوني على السوق، كإشارة جلية وواضحة إلى الأسواق الشعبية بما فيها من عمارة وتصميم وبيع وشراء ومتاجرة وعرض وطلب، بما فيها من موقع للسياحة واستجلاب للزائرين وعرض لما فيها من محتويات تقدم للحاضرين والزائرين فكرة عن البلد الذي وجد فيه هذا السوق. هذه فكرة الملتقى. وآثرنا كذلك بعد توفيق من الله ثم بجهود من أخينا الدكتور مني أبو نعامة والإخوة العاملين في المعهد أن توزع محاضرات الملتقى على أيام الشارقة التراثية تحت فكرة علمية واحدة. وفي أول أيام هذا الملتقى وفي ثاني يوم من أيام الشارقة التراثية نستضيف علما من أعلام العلم والثقافة والتاريخ والعلوم الإنسانية وعلوم اللغات السامية، أستاذنا الجليل أستاذ الدكتور جون هيلي. أنا عرفته منذ عام 1988 وأشرف عليه في رسالة الماجستير وفي أطروحة الدكتوراه لما واصلنا العمل والدراسة في جامعة مانشستر في المملكة المتحدة. بروفيسور جون هيلي من مواليد 10 فبراير 1948، يعني إن شاء الله الثلاث القادم يكمل 78 سنة. وتنقل أستاذنا الجليل في دراسته، تعلم، هو مولود في مدينة ليدز في بريطانيا، ودرس في جامعة لندن، حصل على الدكتوراه سنة 1977، ودرس في جامعة برمنغهام، في جامعة كارديف، ودرس في جامعة درم، التقيت به في درم، ثم انتقلنا معه إلى جامعة مانشستر وتقاعد عام 2013. أستاذنا يعرف 13 لغة من اللغات القديمة والحديثة، له العديد من الكتب في تاريخ الأنباطي وقريت رأس الشمرة في سوريا وفي تدمر وفي اللغة الآرامية، ودرسني اللغة السريانية أصلا، ووجدت فيه نعم العالم العلم. اليوم بيتكلم الدكتور جون هيلي عن بداية العمل بالمتاجرة في الأسواق. نحن بدأنا بالتاريخ القديم وننتهي بالتاريخ الحديث، ولهذا حضور هذه الندوات يربط الحاضر أو الشخص المستمع بالماضي والوسيط والقديم والحديث، فيتعرف على ألفاظ المتاجرة في الأسواق من بيع وشراء في اللغات القديمة بالعصور القديمة حتى العصر الروماني، وأستاذنا متخصص في هذا المجال وبيتكلم بالإنجليزي، بعدين أعطيكم ملخص لمحاضرته. جون بليز.
Thank you very much. I begin by thanking Dr. Hamad for his remarks. The ones that I could understand were exaggerated, and the ones I couldn't understand. I'm conscious that this is mixed. Sorry, I must hold this in the right place. I'm conscious that this is a mixed audience of people who have academic expertise in this field and others. And I intend to keep that in mind as part of what I say. I will speak for about half an hour. And what I'm going to do, instead of reading out lots of stuff written on paper here, I'm going to go through the slides I have prepared. Sorry, I have to hold this up. So I will begin. So the first thing I have to say is to thank the Sharjah Institute for Heritage and Dr. Abdulaziz for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here. I will try to keep what I say as easy to translate and understand as possible. So we begin with the question in general of markets. Surprisingly, there is a large academic literature about whether markets existed or not.
If you catch it like that, antenna cut. You need only like that.
I see.
يعني هنا antenna. Sorry.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
Sorry, doctor. If you your hand up here.
Right.
Sorry, doctor.
I see. Okay. So there have been debates about whether markets existed in the earliest period of the ancient Near East that we know about. Some people have doubted that, and the names of some of the people involved in this discussion are on the screen. The main idea of throwing doubt upon the existence of markets in the ancient Near East was propounded by a scholar called Karl Polanyi, who was an economic historian and a sociologist. He argued that there was no evidence archaeologically for marketplaces in the ancient Near Eastern world, and therefore there were no markets, and he supposed that there were other ways of organizing trade. We do know, in fact, that trade was organized rather differently in ancient times. For example, palaces of kings were often centers of trade. They often contained workshops, and Polanyi used this kind of evidence, and also the fact that bartering, that is, exchanging gifts without the use of any money or silver, was a common practice in the ancient Near East. He used it to argue that there were no markets with market price variation of the kind that we take for granted. So there weren't central markets in every city-state. But this has been that idea has been largely now rejected. One of the reasons it's been rejected is that archaeology has shown that what was happening in the early 20th century and earlier was that when archaeologists came to a site in the Middle East, they were always looking for temples and palaces. They were never looking for marketplaces, or the places where ordinary people worked and had their daily lives. And there are a number of very good discussions of this whole issue, including the one by Bert van der Spek in 2015, which shows that there is, or there was, market variation of prices. That is, you can tell from the text that prices were going up and down, and you can tell from other texts that if you wanted certain goods, you had to go to a particular place to get those goods. So this is contradicting what Polanyi said. Also, an archaeologist, Adelheid Otto, who's in Munich, argued in a paper in 2019 that when you look at the archaeological evidence now, you find that there are a number of ancient Near Eastern cities where there were open spaces where market trading seems to have taken place. She mentions Ugarit on the Syrian coast, Tel Monbaka on the Euphrates in Syria, Tel Tukan, and Tel Bazi also in Syria. Now, the detailed study of ancient trade has a long history, and one of the great founders of the subject was Klaas Wienhoff, also mentioned on the slide. In 1972, he wrote a book called The Old Assyrian Trade, and it was focused on the subject of trade at the city of Kanesh in Turkey and on markets, and he's got quite a long section on markets there. And finally, in this bibliography, I mentioned Stephanie Daly. Her book on Mari in Syria also refers to the presence and activities of markets. Now, I prepared this lecture on the assumption that it might be a bit longer than half an hour. I'm now going to go through very quickly a few pictures on my presentation and then come on to the things that I want to speak more about. This is an obsidian bowl which was found in Ur in Iraq, but the obsidian it's made from comes from Nemrut Dağ in Turkey. So this is a long distance trade that was going on. We can imagine that precious goods like obsidian, which is the material of that bowl, would have been so valued that they would have been transported long distances, and there would have been competition for the obtaining of those precious substances. When we turn to the texts, the early texts that we have immediately from the ancient Iraq, Mesopotamia, going back to around 3000 BC, they begin to mention things connected with markets and trade. One of the, this is a list of terms that are used in these early texts. Mahiru for market, Beit Mahirim, market building, Rabbi Mahirim, the head of the market or the market supervisor. And a very common word that was used for a merchant that you might like to be aware of was the word tamkar, tamkarum, a merchant. This is almost certainly related to the Arabic word tajir and tijara. It's difficult to prove it completely, but it's probably connected to it. And then there are words for special areas in cities which appear in the text, such as karum, which is a trading quarter of a city, an area of a city where trade took place. And also suku, which originally in Akkadian meant street, but was also a street where markets existed. And sometimes it's clear from the text that markets existed in those streets. Now, I mentioned already Old Assyrian trade, and the Old Assyrian long-distance trade is particularly amazing, I would say, is the word that I would use. It's around 1900 BCE, so 1900 years before Christ, and it was a long-distance trade between Ashur in the north of what is now Iraq and Kanesh in central Anatolia, and it consisted of goods being transported from Ashur to Kanesh. The main goods that were exported were tin and textiles. The tin was important because in the making of bronze, this is the Bronze Age that we're talking about, in the making of bronze, tin is an essential ingredient. There is no tin in Anatolia, but there is a big Bronze Age culture in Anatolia, and they needed tin, and they used to import it from Iran into northern Assyria, and then transport it by caravans, donkey caravans, often very large caravans, sometimes as many as 200 donkeys in a caravan from Ashur to Kanesh. Other goods were brought from Babylonia into Ashur and then transported to Kanesh. This is a map which I had to translate the caption from Italian into English, but you can see it there. So this site, Kanesh Kultepe, produced thousands, over 20,000 clay tablets of the kind you can see on the screen. Tin, textiles, and other exotic goods, such as lapis lazuli, were brought into Kanesh for trade. The trade center at Kanesh was outside the city center. This is an aerial view of the tell of Kanesh, and you can see the main tell, which is where the city was, and over to the, can I do this? I'm not sure I can. Well, yeah, over to the right here is where the Karum was. And it was in the Karum that many of the trade texts were found, texts referring to trade. So we're in the early part of the second millennium BCE. We've talked about tins and Karum. I could also mention that there was a building in Kanesh called the Beit Alim, the town hall, which was deeply involved in the trading activity of the city. And various authors, including Dirksen and Larsen, have argued in recent publications that there was clear evidence of price variation. This is an important concept for economic historians, that prices could go up and down depending upon supply and demand. Sometimes supply could be affected by bad weather or by difficult journeys across dangerous territory, but prices went up and down. Moving on now to a different Bronze Age city, also very well known, the city of Mari at Tel Hariri in Syria, in the slightly later date, 1830, 1760. This city of Mari, which is right in the middle of the map there, was another important trade center, but it stands as a good example of a trade center and a market system in which the palace, the royal palace, had a big role. There were shops, there were, sorry, not selling things, but workshops. There were workshops inside the palace at Mari, and the palace produced goods which were then sold outside the palace. Now, I'm moving on in time just as my time is gradually disappearing. In the first millennium BCE, two important changes need to be noted. Clay tablets began to be used less and less, and papyrus began to be used more and more. And another change is a change of language. The Aramaic language, which is what I'm a specialist in, became virtually universal in the later part of the first millennium BC. It was used in Egypt, in southern Anatolia, in Mesopotamia, in Iran, and of course in the Gulf as well, because we have a number of Aramaic inscriptions from the Gulf area, some of which were discussed in the paper written by Dr. Hamad and me in 1999, and also more recently the Malaysia tomb inscription, which is a very important bilingual. So Aramaic was everywhere. And it was spoken in these various cities. I'll mention one or two of them in a moment, so I'm going to try to use the arrow to point out. Palmyra in the middle, more or less in the middle of the picture. You will know Petra down here also. And these cities, Hatra in northern Iraq, Seleucia, Ctesiphon in southern Iraq, all of these cities, including Madain Saleh in Saudi Arabia, all of these cities were important in this later period in connection with trade, and the main language used was of different forms of Aramaic. Very quickly, Aramaic was used in Egypt, and you can see an example of an Aramaic papyrus from the end of the 6th century BCE here. In Elephantine is the island opposite Aswan in the Nile, in the very far south of Egypt. From Elephantine come a lot of documents, but other places have produced a lot of ostraca. Ostraca are bits of broken pottery which were used as a writing material in ancient times because it was very cheap. It was very easily available. You really only had to go out into your garden and you would find broken pottery and you could write on it. This new way of writing, instead of writing with a sharp pen on wet clay, now became writing with ink, writing on papyrus and parchment. There are also some other ostraca from Idumea in the south of Palestine, which I'd mentioned as well. Now I come to the main part, in a way, of what I wanted to put before you, present you with, and that's a short discussion of Palmyra, known by its local name as Tadmur in Syria. It was a great trading center during the Roman period, and that long-distance trade that it carried out included trade with northern India, and it had, for that reason, trade colonies in the Arabian Gulf at the kingdom called Caracini. Again, I refer to the works of Dr. Hamad, his thesis of 1993, and various other writings that have appeared since. So it was a long distance trade that the people of Palmyra were involved in. There's lots of evidence of long distance trade. And in a way, I will just leave that aside for the moment, because studies of long distance trade of that kind are very common. There are books written upon it over and over and over again. What I want to concentrate on for the remaining time is on the internal market of the city of Palmyra, the market situation within Palmyra itself. I'll come back to the Rab Souk reference there. The main source of information on this subject of the internal market is an important and long bilingual Aramaic and Greek inscription, which is called the Palmyrene Tariff. It's dated 137 CE, and it's now in St. Petersburg. And as one of the authors on this subject said in 1984, it gives what he called a vivid glimpse of the social life of a great Middle Eastern city. It's almost unique, this tariff text. There are one or two other texts of a similar kind from the western part of the Roman Empire. The most famous one and the most complete one is the Customs Law of Asia, which is dated 62 CE and comes from Ephesus in Turkey. This is the Palmyrene tariff, now in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. It's an amazing long document of over 400 lines. It's set out very systematically with a heading and then columns of Aramaic and columns of Greek. And on the left, the first Greek text is a record of the passing of the law which implemented these tariff regulations. So I'm now going to show you some quotations from the tariff. The first one that's illustrative is that the reason for making the tariff inscription was, I've highlighted it there in the middle of the page, there were disputes concerning taxes between the merchants and the tax collectors. So because of the disputes, the authorities of Palmyra drew up a new set of tax regulations. And that's incorporated into this inscription. It's amazingly detailed. This is just a page concerned with, or a section concerned with oil. 3 different types of oil are distinguished. I won't read through this, it's too long. But you've got a section on perfumed oil, a section on olive oil, and a section on fuel oil, and different taxes applied to the goods involved. Now, I remind you that unlike the long distance trade, this is concerned with the internal market of Palmyra. So these are taxes on goods that were being bought and sold in the city of Palmyra and brought into Palmyra for sale. These are local taxes. There are taxes on animals. This is a bit easier to quote from since it's a bit shorter. So importing a horse, 10 denarii. Denarius was the coinage that they used. For lambs, for import and export, 1 asarius, which is a smaller coin. For a young camel, 3 asarii. For a large goat, the tax collector must collect 2 asarii. And for a kid, the tax, that's a young goat, the tax is 1 asarius. Incidentally, note that camels are now involved in the story. In the earlier part of the story of long distance trade, there were no camels being used, so far as we know, for domestic use. And they existed, of course, but they weren't being used for transporting goods. Donkeys were used in earlier times. By this period, camels are in common use for transporting goods. And then we've got even, very quick on this, information on how much value different methods of transport had. So we know that a wagon load of goods was 8 times the value of a donkey load. So a wagon carried 8 donkeys worth of goods, and the camel was in between at 4. There was a marketplace at Palmyra. This is a picture of it. Taken, of course, before recent events which have destroyed some of it. And it's a very elaborate one, although it's not very big. It's not enormous. It's about 70 by 90 meters, the agora, as it's called. Agora is the Greek word for a marketplace. But it does have, on the right, you can see a separate courtyard, which has usually been thought to be connected with the marketplace. Scholars who are more expert in the archaeology of Palmyra than me think that all the different goods that are mentioned in the tariff text were not bought and sold here in this place. It's not big enough. It's not possible really to think that all these animals and wagons and so on were coming into the city and putting their goods into this marketplace. So the thought is that probably what was happening was that there were other places where goods were stored and exchanged, but that the contracts that were done about buying and selling goods were done here in this central square. Briefly, because I'm running out of time, there are distinctions made, for example, between shopkeepers and peddlers. A shopkeeper has a fixed shop. A peddler has a cart or something, or an animal, and he takes things around different places. There are taxes on those, and they're distinguished. The word for a shop is chanutha in Aramaic. And there's also a head of the market who appears in an inscription, Rab Souk, the head of the market. And the fact that souk could mean market is very clear also from Nabatean texts. There's a Nabatean papyrus which says 2 shops with their rooms located in the souk of the village, the marketplace of the village. Slave sales are covered in the text of the tariff. And this is an important part of the economy of the ancient world. And it's another of the details which makes it different from modern economies, because most work on farms, for example, was done by slaves, not by the owner of the land. And this means the economic cost of production is completely different from a modern cost of production. So there are some things about ancient trade and modern trade that can't be compared. So this is about importing and exporting slaves. And even more quickly, I want just to run through the fact that slaves and slave markets were quite important. Get this to work again. Top right-hand corner of the map is the city of Nisibis, Nusaybin in southern Turkey, which was well known as one of the major slave markets. There are several texts which refer to slaves being bought at Nisibis. Some of them survive in other Aramaic dialects. For example, this one, which I've published some stuff about recently, is a slave sale from 243 CE, which is written in southern Turkey, and it's a slave sale. And it's interesting that it's a woman selling the slave, and she's fully entitled to sell the slave. We haven't got time to go through all of this, but I've put in bold letters, dark letters, a few of the details. You can see her name is Marcia Aurelia Mata Atta. I have received from the buyer 700 denarii, and I've sold to him Matsine, my female slave. So it's a woman selling a female slave to somebody else. The legal language that's used for this is that when the sale goes through, the new owner has the right to keep or to sell or to do with her whatever you wish. This is a kind of formula, a legal formula. Another detail worth noting is that in the 3rd paragraph, it mentions the archive of the city of Edessa. So a copy of the text was placed in the archives, kind of central registry of ownership of property, including slaves. And then the final thing at the bottom there that's interesting is that this woman, Marcia Aurelia Mata Atta, can't write. She doesn't know how to write. So her husband writes at the bottom of the contract instead of her. But it's her contract, it's in her name, but she can't write, so he signs the signature at the bottom. There are similar texts of this kind from all over the Near East in this period. I'll skip this one, but this is again showing legal language. If you notice right in the middle of the page, the same phrase is used. Full price, forever, to possess or sell or pledge or bequeath or give as a gift or do with this purchase whatever he wishes. These are legal formulae that were used. And common terminology can be established from this. We've got words like zavan, this is Aramaic. Zavan, he bought. Zaben, he sold. Rahan and Mashken, he pledged. Daki and Marak for clearing away claims against property. Sahade, witnesses. Some of these words are familiar, of course, because they're very similar to Arabic forms. Arabe, which is guarantors. The word for a contract is shatoro. And I summarize then as the hand on my watch approaches 7 o'clock. Markets were clearly an important part of ancient Near Eastern life, though the evidence is clearer in the Roman period because of the Palmyrene evidence. The earlier evidence is mostly kind of indirectly derived from other sources. Markets were subject to price variation. It's clear that for Polanyi and for others arguing about the existence of markets, this is very important. Price variation definitely did exist. There's no doubt about that. Thirdly, markets were regulated. In Akkadian, you've got the Rab Machirim, the head of the market. In Aramaic, Rab Souk, the head of the market. In Greek, Agoronomos, the regulator of the market. In Latin, the aedile. And this is a role I understand. I turn to Dr. Hamad to confirm, continuing in the later use in Arabic of Sahib Souk, a kind of market regulator. Finally, taxation was a common factor for all commercial activity. It existed at Mari. I didn't mention it earlier, but there was taxation of goods at Mari. There was taxation in other Near Eastern cities, and there was certainly taxation at Palmyra, Tadmur, as we have seen. And that's it. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتور هيلي for your presentation. طبعا بس أنا بشرح تلخيص لمحاضرة الأستاذ. وفي البداية ذكر أن بعض العلماء المعاصرين ينكرون وجود الأسواق في المدن القديمة، أنه لا توجد أسواق بسبب لا توجد آثار تدل على وجود مبنى خاص له دكاكين، له أعمدة معينة تقيم فيها هذه المدن أماكن البيع والشراء. لكن الأستاذ لا يرى هذا الأمر، بل ثبت من خلال الآثار أن قصور الملوك في المدن القديمة، حنا نتكلم عن الألف الثالث قبل الميلاد، كان يوجد فيها نشاط اقتصادي وبيع وشراء، وكانت توجد بالقرب منها ورش للتصنيع الأدوات المعدنية وتصنيع الفخاريات. ثم ألمح إلى أن من الطبيعي أنه كل المدن القديمة كانت توجد فيها أماكن للبيع والشراء، يعني يستحيل أن يتم هذا الأمر بين البيوت أو في الأماكن العامة أو في المتنزهات، بل يجب أن يتم ذلك في مكان مخصوص، حتى ولو لم يعثر علماء الآثار على آثار لهذه الأسواق، إلا أنه من الطبيعي، يرى الأستاذ أنه من الطبيعي أن تكون في مدن الشرق بصورة عامة هذه الأماكن للبيع والشراء. وذكر مايكل روستوف واحد من كبار الكتاب والمؤرخين الروس، وأنا اعتمدت عليه في دراستي أيضا في الدكتوراه. ألف كتاب مدن القوافل، وها من أجمل، إلى الآن لم يترجم هالكتاب، ومطبوع سنة 1972. مدن القوافل من أجمل وأمتع المؤلفات اللي تتكلم عن مدن القوافل في بلاد الشرق. وأشار كذلك إلى مدينة ماري، وهي المعروفة الآن في سوريا بالتل الحريري، إلى الشرق من الحدود السورية، القرب من الحدود العراقية. وجدوا فيها مجموعة من النصوص القديمة اللي هي نسميها الرقم الطينية، ظهر صورة اللي هي بهذا الشكل، ويخطون عليها بآلة تشبه المسمار. فهذه هي الكتابة المسمارية، تكتب بها هذه الرقم الطينية، ووجد منها بالآلاف في مدن الشرق المختلفة. وذكر كلمة سوق ذكرها بأنها موجودة في اللغة الأكادية، وهي قريبة باللفظ كلمة السوق في اللغة العربية، تعود لعام 900 قبل الميلاد. وظهر لنا الخارطة التجارة اللي كانت تأتي من بلاد الأناضول إلى بلاد آشور، ثم إلى مدينة بابل. وذكرنا أن هاي الرقم الطينية بالآلاف ومتعددة. وذكر الأستاذ أن عثروا في الرقم الطينية تفاوت في أسعار السلع والبضائع، ارتفاع ونزول نتيجة للظروف البيئية ونتيجة للأوضاع الأمنية من الحروب وغيرها، فترتفع أسعار هذه السلع في أوقات الأزمات وتنخفض في أوقات السلم والأمن والهدوء. وأشار بأن المدن القديمة كانت فيها القصر الملكي اللي تمارس فيه كل هذه الأمور. وثم ركز على اللغة الآرامية. اللغة الآرامية أصبحت لغة عالمية منذ القرن التاسع قبل الميلاد، وأنا عملنا دراسة سابقا عن النقوش الآرامية في الخليج، واللغة الآرامية أصبحت لغة عالمية والجميع يتحدث بها، حتى الفرس كتبوا باللغة الآرامية، وجدت فيها كذلك ألفاظ كثيرة. وذكر الدكتور مدينة موقع مليحة اللي اكتشف فيه بعض آثار الكتابات الآرامية، وفي البتراء، وفي تدمر، وفي مدينة الحضر، وفي سلوقية، وفي مداين صالح وجدت هذه الكتابات الآرامية، وبعضها كتب على أوراق البردي المشهورة. ثم أشار إلى مدينة تدمر. مدينة تدمر من أشهر مدن الشرق. رسالة الدكتوراه مالي كانت عن مدينة تدمر وصلتها بالخليج من القرن الثاني قبل الميلاد القرن الثاني الميلادي، الثالث قبل الميلاد القرن الثاني الميلادي. واتذكر ترجمت فيها 50 نقش باللغة الآرامية، اللغة الإنجليزية، اللغة اليونانية، فهذه كانت لها مكانة مهمة في هذه المنطقة. وذكر ما يسمى بقانون التعرفة الجمركية مثل قانون الضرائب، وأشار إلى ما في هذا القانون المهم سنة 137 ميلادية، وذكر أنواع من الضرائب المفروضة على دخول البهائم، على البيع، على حتى بيع الرقيق، بيع الذهب، كله موجود في هذا القانون. هم ما يشير على ماذا؟ هذا 400 سطر موجود في مدينة سانت بطرسبرغ في روسيا. النقش الكامل هذا الحجري موجود في مدينة هناك، وترجم أكثر إلى اللغات المختلفة. أظن عدنان بني ترجمة اللغة العربية زمان. ومدينة تدمر يوجد فيها سوق حوالي 70 متر في 70 متر عرض وطول، وهو طبعا بدأت تستخدم هاي المدينة اللغة الآرامية واللغة اليونانية واللغة اللاتينية. وأشار إلى البيع والشراء، وذكر قصة عن وحدة كانت تبيع الرقيق في مدينة نصيبين اللي هي الآن أظن حدود تركيا الحالية في 243 قبل الميلاد، وهي كانت تبيع، ويقول إن هاي المرأة لا تقرأ ولا تكتب، حتى في التوقيع زوجها هو اللي وقع عنها، وكانت تبيع الرقيق. وذكر نقش اللي ذكره الدكتور هذا، كانت بايعة وحدة من الرقيق بنت إلى شخص اشتراها، وهناك ذاكرة شروط التعامل حتى مع هذه الفتاة، وزوجها بالوكيل عنها وقع عنها، ما هي سيدة سيدة الأعمال لكن لا تعلم بالقراءة والكتابة شيء. وذكر بأن هذا دليل مهم على التعامل في الأسواق في العصور القديمة. يعني ما دام عندنا الآن أماكن البيع وألفاظ للبيع وشروط للبيع وقانون البيع والشراء والمتاجرة، على يدل ذلك على وجود مثل هذه الأسواق في المدن القديمة. وختم الأستاذ ببعض الألفاظ، قال في اللغة الآرامية أمير السوق يسمى رب السوق، وهي كلمة قريبة من اللغة العربية. الرب هنا تعني صاحب السوق أو سيد السوق أو رئيس السوق. وذكر بعض الألفاظ الخاصة بهذه الكلمات، ذكر كلمة زبن، البيع والشراء، ثم ألمح إلى أهمية وجود دراسة الحياة الاقتصادية في المدن القديمة. والسلام عليكم.
ناخذ 5 دقائق تقريبا.
لا إذا سعيد يسأل بالإنجليزي.
في سؤال أو استفسار؟
شكرا دكتور مني. كنت أريد أن أسأل الدكتور، كان أشار في كلمته الرائعة، أشار إلى معبد وجزيرة ألفنتين في أسوان، وأعتقد أنه مما رغب وثيقة الزواج التي موجودة في المعبد، فهل هناك إشارة إلى هذا الموضوع؟ وشكرا.
تكلم سؤال.
I can't read it straight off now like that. I think this one is in the Brooklyn Museum in New York, and I've seen it on in an exhibition, but I can't remember what this one is about. One or two of the documents are about marriage, and about dowries, about the gift that comes with marriage to the wife, which she takes with her to the marriage. So I can confirm that there are a number of texts which refer to. This one was just chosen at random, actually, as an example of writing on papyrus. Sorry, I can't answer.
عفوا، بس الدكتور طبعا تكلم عن الفنتين هذه، بس يقول هذه هو ليس فيها ما يتعلق بالزواج، لكن هو اطلع على برديات أخرى فيها موجود من الفنتين بعد، فيها شروط الزواج والهدايا اللي تعطى للزوجة ومتى تأخذها إلى بيتها، يعني من زمان الريايل المرصوصين مساكين.
شكرا على هذه المداخلة القيمة الدكتور. فقط أردت أن أعرج، بقيت أنتظر متى يذكر الدكتور دور المرأة في الأسواق في الثقافات السامية، إلى أن جاءت كلمة woman المرأة. بالفعل في الثقافات السامية لم يكن السوق حكرا على الرجال، ولم يكن السوق ذو منطق ذكوري، بل بالعكس كانت المرأة فاعلة، وكانت حتى تبيع شراب الروح وتبيع الجعة في الثقافات السامية. وحين ذكر كون زوجها هو من يوقع عليها في المبيعات وفي التجارة، بالفعل كانت المرأة تشترك في السوق من حيث المنتجات المنزلية الحرفية، ولم يكن لها صيت هون في هذه النقطة، حيث لم يكن هناك فصل بين السوق والمنزل في الثقافات السامية. شكرا.
She mentions about the woman who work in the trading in the market, and you mentioned very good example for that.
She mentioned a good example.
The woman,
Sorry.
the woman
Yes, yes.
in the Semitic culture,
Yeah.
there is no problem for them to go to the market for the.
Well, there are many details like that which it's difficult to imagine how evidence would survive. I'm trying to think. There's certainly no difficulty in the later period about women having property, buying and selling property independently. I don't think there is much evidence. I can't think of any evidence of a market. You see, as I said in the earlier part of my talk, there is so little evidence of physical markets in the center of cities. It's archaeological evidence. And there's no way of knowing whether women or men or both.
The role of women in market.
Yeah, I'm saying that apart from when there are texts surviving, we have no way of knowing. So when I quoted the example of the woman selling a slave, that's a text surviving, but we don't know whether this was normal in the early period or not. And I'm not aware of any early period documents in which women take the main role. And there's no other evidence. There are things we don't know because of the nature of the surviving evidence. One thing that I left out because I thought it would take up time, but I wanted to also give the idea that if you imagine the map of the Middle East, I won't change it. Imagine the map of the Middle East. From the year 2000 BC, we have some information from here and some information from here. From 1500 BC, we don't have any information from here or here, but we've got a little bit of information from somewhere 1,000 miles away. And in the Roman period, we have information from Palmyra, and from Palestine, from the Babatha archive in Palestine. But apart from that, there is almost nothing. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the evidence is scattered over a wide area and scattered chronologically in time. So we have to use analogy, the concept of historical analogy, which is that if we got details on one period, we have to cautiously apply the same ideas to other periods by analogy. I hope you can translate.
الدكتور لما ذكر قصة هذه المرأة اللي تبيع وتشتري في السوق، يعني هو الأمثل يقول قليل أصلا، ولهذا يجب علينا أن نحذر في تعميم كل نموذج على كل الفترات الزمنية. فترة زمنية قد تكون فيها حضور وفترات الزميقة لا يوجد فيها شيء، ولهذا علينا أن هي نموذج طيب، لكن ليس هو، قد يكون غير معمم أصلا، والمثل الوحيد اللي حصله في ضمن هذه الأمور، من ضمن النماذج كلها.
شكرا. السلام عليكم. تفضل. شكرا. أنا فقط شكرا طبعا على الأستاذ المحاضر على هذه المحاضرة ورئيس الجلسة، وأحب أن أشير بأن أهم تجارة نوع من أنواع التجارة اللي ربطت روما مع المشرق هو تجارة البخور وتجارة اللبان والمر، وهذه تجارة معروفة ورائجة كانت تستخدم طبعا هذه في صناعة المراهم والأدوية، وكذلك كانت تستخدم في طقوس العبادة في روما وفي مصر وفي بابل أيضا. لم نجد هناك ذكر لهذا النوع من أنواع التجارة الذي ربطت روما بالمشرق. شكرا.
Well, my main interest in trade in the Roman period is through the Nabateans, because I've spent a lot of my time writing about Nabatean inscriptions. So we know we've got several bits of information about the Roman trade with Arabia. The Nabatean inscriptions don't give us so much information, because in Petra there is nothing like the Palmyrene tariff, and there are no, in Palmyra also there are other inscriptions which refer to journeys made by officials and traders to the Gulf area, and when they came back they put up an inscription saying this was a very successful trade journey. That is a kind of common type of inscription. But for Petra, there are no inscriptions of that kind. But what there are the reports of the Roman writers like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus say that the Nabateans were involved in the trade from South Arabia to bring especially frankincense into the Roman world. The Romans wanted frankincense. They had a big constant demand for frankincense. And so that was one of the goods. So that's described by outsiders, not by insiders. It's described by the Greek writers. We also have, you've probably come across the text called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which is a 1st century AD Greek text which describes the coast of Arabia, starting from Ayla and going down to round to the Gulf. And it was written by a navigator, somebody who was on a ship, somebody who had been on ships, and he describes, or maybe he or she describes, he describes the ports, the cities that are along the coast, and says what the markets in those cities are useful for, what could be bought, what could be sold. One of those ports is called in his text Leuke Kome, which is, he says that there is a Nabatean presence there with a tax collector who collects taxes of goods going to Petra. So we've got a kind of overland trade route from the Red Sea to Petra and to Gaza, which was the main outlet used by the Nabateans. They took goods from Petra to Gaza and then exported them into the Mediterranean. So we have all of that. There's a kind of long trade route with not a lot of detailed evidence, but with some evidence.
طبعا الدكتور عادل، الأستاذ هنا يشير إلى انخراط الأنباط أكثر من الرومان كرومان في تجارة العطور والبخور. الرومان بأنفسهم لم ينخرطوا في هذه التجارة مباشرة. وذكر عن ميناء لوك الكوم اللي هو يسمى أحيانا الحوراء، هذا جنوب العقبة على الساحة الشرقي للبحر الأحمر. كان يوجد هناك جامع ضرائب نبطي في هذا المكان. كان تجمع الطريق البري بالذات إذا قادم من الجنوب إلى البتراء، أو من البتراء إلى غزة، ثم تنطلق التجارة هذه إلى البحر المتوسط إلى الرومان. وذكر قصة أو كتاب صاحب كتاب الطواف حول البحر الإريتري، أنا عملت تعليق على الكتاب لما ترجم اللغة العربية من اليونان، وذكر قصة الكتاب وكتاباته حول المدن والموانئ الموجودة على البحر الأحمر وخليج عدن والخليج العربي. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا لكم على حضوركم وعلى استماعكم لهذه الجلسة الثقافية الغنية التي ناقشت حضور السوق في الثقافات أو اللغات الآرامية أو السامية القديمة وتجلياتها كذلك عبر الحضارات. الآن أدعو سعادة أبو بكر الكندي مدير معهد الشارقة للتراث مدير أيام الشارقة التراثية للتفضل بتكريم الحضور. بعد ذلك سندعوكم مباشرة إلى توقيع إصدارين من أحدث إصدارات معهد الشارقة للتراث، ثم بعدها جلسة عن الحضور البرتغالي في المناهج التعليمية. شكرا. دكتور جون هيلي تفضل. دكتور حمد بن صراي. نعم. كل الشكر والتقدير لكم على حضوركم. طبعا ادعو الأستاذة لؤلؤ المنصوري تفضلي، سيكون لها توقيع كتاب بعد قليل لكن تكريم مقدما. تفضلي. سيكون لها توقيع كتاب الآن ماء الحجر مباشرة بعد هذه الجلسة. كذلك أدعو سعادة أبو بكر كندي إلى تكريم الوالد عبيد بن صندل.
اهلا مرحبا، كيف الحال؟
شو اخبارك؟ شو امورك؟ عساك بخير؟ ايه كيف حالك؟ ها؟
تفضل أستاذ لؤلؤ لتوقيع الكتاب. الآن وقائع توقيع كتابي ماء الحجر للأستاذة لؤلؤ أحمد المنصوري وكتاب الألعاب الشعبية للوالد عبيد بن صندل. بعد ذلك أدعوكم مباشرة إلى حضور الجلسة حول الحضور البرتغالي في المناهج التعليمية. تفضل الوالد. تفضلوا. أعطي القلم. أيوه خليه يوقع نسخة. أول نسخة